We believed we were about to witness a lesson. Instead, we witnessed a violation of natural law. The grand medical auditorium of the Academy shimmered beneath sterile white light, its vaulted ceiling etched with the sigils of 100 species who had come before us, species that had mapped the boundaries of biology and accepted them. I remember the hum of the atmospheric regulators, the soft clicking of student mandibles, the faint scent of antiseptic vapor drifting across the descending tiers. At the center of the chamber stood the human, Lieutenant Armand Reyes, Terran, classified Deathworlder Tier Apex. He did not look monstrous. He did not look engineered for apocalypse. He stood inside the transparent containment field with relaxed posture, dark eyes scanning the audience as though he were the observer and we the experiment. His limbs were compact compared to the towering frames of my kin. His skin, fragile, exposed, seemed ill-suited for survival beyond controlled climates. Our professor began to lecture. Terran bone density exceeds galactic median by 300%. Muscular fiber redundancy suggests evolutionary compensation for extreme gravitational origin. Pain tolerance, statistically aberrant. We had studied the data, charts, ratios, case files of injury survival that bordered on myth. But numbers are harmless. Numbers do not scream. The containment field activated with a resonant pulse. Phase 1, gravitational amplification. The air itself seemed to thicken. My inner equilibrium sacs fluttered in distress as the gravity dial rose past safe thresholds for most sentience. The human's knees buckled slightly, veins surfaced beneath his skin. The sound came next, a muted crackling from within his frame, like stressed composite plating. His heart rate spiked across the holo display. Phase 2, oxygen deprivation. The atmosphere thinned in a controlled siphon. My species can survive brief hypoxia through metabolic suppression. Humans cannot. His chest expanded sharply, once, twice, then faster, desperate. Capillaries burst across his sclera, staining his eyes crimson. Several students collapsed where they sat. Phase 3, thermal surge. Heat flooded the chamber, contained within the field but radiating outward in visible distortion. Moisture beaded on his skin and evaporated almost instantly. His muscles trembled violently now, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. The monitors screamed. Organ failure probability, 82%. Cardiac arrhythmia detected. "Observe," our professor whispered, his voice trembling despite generations of clinical detachment. "This is why they are called Deathworlders." The human fell. He struck the floor of the containment field with a sound I felt in my thoracic plates. The holo display flashed red. Cardiac arrest, neural activity collapsing, flatline. Silence expanded outward like a shockwave. No one moved. Even the environmental system seemed to hush in reverence to inevitability. This was the boundary. This was the moment where biology concedes defeat. I felt a strange disappointment. So this was the apex predator of a lethal world, reduced to stillness like any other organism. The professor exhaled slowly. End demonstration. But the containment field did not power down, because the human's chest convulsed. A violent, involuntary spasm. Then he inhaled. It was not graceful, it was not heroic. It was a ragged, tearing gasp that sounded like fabric ripping across vacuum. His back arched. The holo display flickered. Cardiac impulse detected, weak, erratic, then stronger. My visual membranes widened to maximum dilation as neural activity reignited across the scan. Microfractures along his forearm began to knit in accelerated cellular repair. The misaligned limb trembled, then shifted, bone grinding audibly as it receded. A sound of collective horror rippled through the auditorium. He rolled onto his side, coughed. Blood spattered the pristine interior of the field. And, with movements that should have been impossible under residual gravity load, Lieutenant Armand Reyes pressed his palms against the floor and pushed himself upright. His legs shook violently. His breathing came in uneven pulls. One eye remained half-flooded and red. Every motion radiated pain. Yet he stood. The professor staggered backward. This exceeds predicted recovery parameters," he murmured. The gravity normalized, the atmosphere stabilized, thermal levels dropped. The containment barrier dissolved with a soft chime. The human took one step forward, then another. He limped out of the field, leaving faint traces of blood where his skin had split. Medical drones rushed toward him, but he raised a trembling hand to halt them. "I'm fine," he rasped. "Fine?" A student beside me, young, untested, her frills quivering in shock, whispered the words none of us could silence. "That should have killed you." The human turned his head toward us, and he smiled. It was not a predator's grin. It was not madness. It was something far more destabilizing. Determination. "You'd be surprised," he said quietly, voice still raw from oxygen starvation. "We get that a lot." In that moment, the sigils above us, the proud emblems of species who believed they understood survival, felt suddenly fragile. Because if death itself could be treated as an inconvenience, then what exactly had the galaxy invited into its alliance? As medical staff escorted the human from the chamber, I found that I could not steady my limbs. We had not witnessed recklessness. We had witnessed proof. Proof that humanity does not treat biological limits as law. And as the holo display replayed the moment of flatline again and again, one realization settled into my consciousness like a gravitational singularity. If this is what they survive in a classroom demonstration, what would they endure in war? The moment Lieutenant Armand Reyes walked out of that containment field, our curriculum became obsolete. By the next rotation, the grand medical auditorium had transformed into something else entirely, an emergency symposium chamber. Faculty from xenobiology, military theory, evolutionary anthropology, and interspecies ethics filled the tiers. The demonstration recording looped endlessly across towering holographic displays, each replay slower than the last, each frame magnified until cellular structures glowed like constellations. I sat among them, no longer merely a student. I was a witness to a contradiction. The holo feed froze at the instant of cardiac arrest, a clean, undeniable flat line, neural activity collapsing into silence. For my species, that moment is final. Injury progresses in a predictable sequence: damage, decline, cessation. But the next frame shattered that certainty. Human cells did not surrender to oxygen deprivation. They erupted into activity. "Observe the mitochondrial surge," Professor Vell noted, his voice brittle. "Energy production spikes despite systemic hypoxia." Another professor magnified the human's fractured forearm. Microfractures spread like lightning through dense calcium lattice, then halted, reversed. Cellular repair cascades activated in milliseconds. Protein synthesized in frantic precision. Osteoblast activity accelerated beyond previously documented rates. Bone did not merely mend, it reorganized. A murmur swept through the chamber. To us, injury is an ending. To them, it is an argument. Lieutenant Reyes stood before the assembly once more, this time clothed in formal Terran military attire. Bruising still colored his skin. A stabilization brace supported one arm. He should have been confined to medical suspension. Instead, he addressed us with quiet composure. "You're studying the wrong thing," he said. Professor Vell's cranial frills flared. "Clarify. You're looking at how we recover. You should be asking why we don't quit before we need to." The chamber dimmed as environmental lights adjusted. A planetary hologram flickered to life behind him, a blue sphere streaked with storm systems and tectonic fault lines. "Earth," he said. I had seen images before, archival files, climate charts, but never presented like this. Predator density, extreme. Atmospheric volatility, high. Microbial diversity, catastrophic by galactic standards. Tectonic instability, continuous. This is a death world by your classification system, Ours too, if we're honest. The hologram zoomed inward. Massive storms spiraled across oceans. Wildfires scarred continents. Glacial epochs advanced and retreated over millennia. We evolved where the ground shakes without warning, where the air can freeze or burn you depending on the season, where microorganisms invisible to the eye can kill you slowly. Images replaced climate data. Primitive humans running across savannas, pursued by predators larger and stronger than themselves. We weren't the fastest, he admitted. We weren't the strongest, but we could keep going. A recording played. Terran endurance hunters jogging under a merciless sun, tracking prey across kilometers until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Persistence hunting, Professor Vell murmured, disbelief evident. Reyes nodded. We outlasted things. The hologram shifted again. Human athletes crossing finish lines with ligaments torn, collapsing only after victory. Soldiers dragging wounded allies through active combat zones despite visible trauma. Civilians clawing through debris after planetary disasters, earthquakes, floods, infernos. I recognized statistical impossibility in every frame. One Terran soldier continued functioning with metallic fragments embedded near vital organs. Another individual, classified as a civilian, survived structural collapse beneath thousands of weight units of debris for multiple rotations before rescue. Why, a council scholar demanded, why continue when survival probability approaches zero? Reyes considered the question carefully. Because sometimes zero isn't accurate. Sometimes it's just what you assume. Silence followed. I felt something shift inside my thoracic cavity, a recalibration of belief. Humanity's greatest adaptation was not bone density, not muscular redundancy, not accelerated clotting factors or shock resistance. It was refusal. Refusal to accept projected outcomes. Refusal to concede to pain signals designed to enforce retreat. Refusal to let mathematics define possibility. Our behavioral sciences division presented new data. Human neurology releases chemical motivators under stress, adrenaline, endorphins, dopamine, compounds that override inhibitory signals. Where my species enters protective shutdown under extreme trauma, humans ignite. Injury stimulates counteraction, one analyst said, almost reverently. A disturbing conclusion emerged from the data synthesis. Humans do not stop when they should. The chamber lights brightened again. Reyes folded his hands behind his back. We're not invincible, he said. We break, we bleed, we die. The holo display shifted to casualty lists from Terran conflicts, names scrolling endlessly. We just don't assume that breaking is the end. His gaze swept across the auditorium, lingering on us, the future diplomats, scientists, strategists of the Alliance. We train to endure, not because it makes us special, because if we don't, someone else pays the price. That was the twist I had not anticipated. There was no arrogance in him, no triumph, only responsibility. A student from the outer tiers raised a trembling limb. If your species can resist death so effectively, what happens when you are cornered? His eyes shifted, not towards me, but toward the stars visible through the atrium's crystalline dome. For a moment, the humor faded. Then we don't just survive, he said quietly. Before I could request clarification, an alarm tone reverberated through the academy. Not a drill, not a scheduled exercise. A priority transmission from the Outer Rim colonies began to override every display in the facility. Red glyphs flooded the air. Unknown fleet detected. Multiple biospheres compromised. Immediate council assembly required. I looked back at the human. He did not appear surprised, only focused. And for the first time since the demonstration, a new question eclipsed all others in my mind. If humans treat injury as an argument, what do they treat extinction as? The first images arrived without sound. That is what I remember most. No dramatic musical crescendos, no frantic pleas for aid, only silent, drifting visuals transmitted from the Outer Rim colonies. Worlds once vibrant with biosignatures, now stripped to sterile geometry. Oceans gone, atmospheres thinned to chemical residue, cities reduced to latticework skeletons, as if something had methodically peeled life from their surfaces. The Academy's atrium darkened as the emergency transmission overrode every display. Students froze mid-motion, faculty stood rigid. I felt my equilibrium sacs tremble in involuntary distress. Unknown fleet detected. Origin, dark space vector. Composition, non-organic, non-mechanical hybrid signatures. Intent, resource extraction at biospheric scale. Entire civilizations had vanished without resistance. The phrase echoed in my mind. Without resistance. Within a rotation, I was reassigned from xenobiology studies to diplomatic observation. The Galactic Council demanded documentation from academic witnesses who had studied the humans' resilience. I did not question the logic. If extinction was approaching, we needed to understand survival. The Academy's chamber was carved from the core of an asteroid, vast, circular, illuminated by holographic star maps that pulsed in crimson warning. Representatives of 87 species occupied their designated tiers. Fear has a scent. It permeated the chamber like ionized metal. The projection at the center rotated slowly. The fleet. At first glance, it resembled a swarm of fractured moons. Then, magnification revealed structure. Vast biomechanical constructs, hulls grown rather than forged, veins of luminescent energy pulsing through armored carapaces, appendages extending toward planetary surfaces like feeding tendrils. Harvesters. They do not bombard, a RIM delegate said, voice unsteady. They descend, they strip biomass, mineral density, atmospheric components. They leave nothing of ecological complexity. A strategist overlaid casualty projections. If trajectory holds, 17 inhabited systems compromised within 3 cycles. Evacuation probability, 12%. Containment success rate, statistically negligible. Loss ratios were calculated. Accepted. That is how most civilizations confront annihilation, by minimizing damage and preserving what fragments they can. My species would have begun archival protocols. But before the vote could formalize defensive retreat, a new signal requested chamber access. Terran. A ripple passed through the assembly. The humans had been alliance members for less than a standard decade. Militarily capable, yes, but politically minor. Their territories lay far from the RIM incursion vector. They were not directly threatened. The chamber doors parted. Lieutenant Armand Reyes entered, not in ceremonial uniform, but in operational black. His injuries from the demonstration had faded to faint discolorations along his skin. He walked with steady, deliberate strides. He did not bow. He did not posture. He simply stood at the center of the chamber and looked up at the looming projection of the Devourer fleet. "This is confirmed hostile?" he asked. A RIM delegate answered. 3 systems sterilized, no communication attempts, no negotiation. Armand Reyes nodded once. The Council's high speaker extended a tendril toward him. "Terran representative, your advisory status permits commentary but not—" "Send us," Reyes said. The interruption reverberated through the chamber. A dozen species emitted alarm responses. The high speaker stiffened. "Clarify?" "Deploy our fleet to the RIM," Reyes repeated. "We engage first contact." A strategist's crest flared bright violet. "Your forces are insufficient in mass. The constructs outscale your largest cruisers by a factor of 3. "We're aware," Reyes replied calmly. "You would be annihilated." A faint, almost amused exhale escaped him. "Maybe." The word was not reckless, it was measured. My memory returned to the containment chamber, the flat line, the breath. Reyes activated a secondary projection. Earth. Ice ages cascading across continents, supervolcanic eruptions blotting out sunlight, meteor impacts carving scars into crust, archival footage of human conflicts, world wars that reshaped their civilization through fire. "We've faced extinction events before," he said quietly, "some natural, some self-inflicted." A murmur spread. "You survived," the high speaker acknowledged. "We survived ourselves," Reyes corrected. There was no pride in his tone, only fact. A RIM representative leaned forward.
Why intervene? Your territories are outside immediate threat range. Reyes's gaze swept across the chamber. Because they won't stay that way, he answered. Predators don't stop at one feeding ground. Silence deepened. He continued. You calculate loss ratios, you prepare evacuations. That's rational. A pause. But if you only retreat, you teach the enemy you will. The strategist's crest dimmed slightly. You propose direct engagement with a superior force. On what basis? Reyes looked up at the projection of the harvesters, those vast pulsing entities drifting toward inhabited stars. On the basis that we don't quit when the math says we should. There it was again. Refusal. The chamber dimmed as Terran fleet schematics replaced the star map. Their vessels were smaller than most Alliance warcruisers, angular, dense, layered with reinforced plating far thicker than standard doctrine recommended. Mass-to-volume ratio, extreme. Power output, concentrated. Crew endurance ratings, aberrant. You built them for this, I realized aloud, forgetting my place among observers. Reyes glanced toward my tier briefly. Recognition flickered in his eyes. We built them to last, he said. A RIM delegate's voice trembled. If you fail, you weaken the Alliance further. If we do nothing, Reyes replied, there won't be an Alliance left to weaken. The High Speaker withdrew into contemplative silence. Across the chamber, representatives communicated in rapid spectrum pulses. Probability matrices shifted. Terran fleet survival odds, low. Delay potential, if successful, significant. Evacuation window increase, 37%. That number hung in the air. 37% more lives saved. The High Speaker finally extended a tendril in formal decision. Terran fleet authorized for advanced deployment, engagement at your discretion. A ripple of disbelief followed. The humans had not demanded protection, they had volunteered for first impact. As the council adjourned, I moved toward the observation viewport overlooking the orbital docks. Terran warships detached from their moorings one by one. They were not elegant like Illyrian cruisers, not massive like the Karth Dominion carriers. They were compact, dense, scarred even before battle. I observed hull plating layered upon older hull plating, modifications added over time rather than replaced, redundant systems visible through maintenance apertures, external docking clamps reinforced beyond standard tolerance. They looked less like warships, more like survivors. Lieutenant Reyes joined me at the viewport. You understand the risk, I said quietly. Yes. You may not return. Another pause. We've never guaranteed that, he replied. Below us, a final vessel ignited its engines, reactor output flaring bright against the void. Why you? Why step forward when others hesitate? Reyes considered the question. Because if you can endure more, you're supposed to, he said slowly. There was no dramatic speech, no declaration of glory, only responsibility. The fleet began to move. One by one, Terran ships aligned toward the rim vector and accelerated into slip space. Smaller than the harvesters, fewer, outmatched by every visible metric. And yet, I felt something shift in the chamber around me, a recalibration of gravitational expectation. Humans weren't asking for survival, they were volunteering for sacrifice. As the last Terran vessel vanished into distortion, the star map recalculated projected impact timelines. Unknown fleet ETA, decreasing. Terran intercept window, minimal. I remembered the flat line in the containment chamber, the moment where all probability declared death. Then, the breath. If that demonstration had been a glimpse of their biology, what, I wondered, would their warfare reveal?
The first engagement was predicted to last 6 minutes. 7 at most, if Terran shielding exceeded expectation. The harvesters emerged from dark space without flare or distortion, their colossal forms blotting starlight as though gravity itself bent to accommodate them. Even at extreme magnification, their surfaces refused symmetry. Armor flowed like calcified tissue, veins of bioluminescent energy pulsed beneath semi-organic plating. Vast tendrils flexed and recoiled, tasting the vacuum for life. Opposite them, small by comparison, the Terran fleet. 12 vessels, against 37. The Council observation chamber fell silent as the two forces closed distance near the outer debris halo of a sterilized rim system. No planets remained intact enough to defend, no civilians left to evacuate. Only void, only reckoning. The first Harvester weapon discharged without warning. There was no beam, no projectile, only distortion. Space shimmered around the Terran lead ship, and its forward hull began to unravel at molecular resolution. Matter did not explode. It dissolved. Structural integrity collapsed from 90% to 40% in a single breath. A strategist near me whispered, "They are finished." But the Terran ship did not retreat. It accelerated. Its forward section sloughed away into particulate debris, while internal bulkheads slammed shut, sealing compromised decks. Power rerouted, visible in bright arcs along external conduits that should have been destroyed. Improvised redistribution, one analyst murmured in disbelief. They are rewriting their power grid mid-combat. A second Harvester discharged. Another Terran vessel took the hit. Its starboard flank disintegrated, exposing interior corridors to vacuum. For a moment, we saw through it, crew silhouettes flung against emergency tethers. Then, magnetic seals activated. Sections detached deliberately, jettisoned before further dissolution could cascade inward. They were shedding limbs to survive. The Terran fleet returned fire, not with elegant energy lances like ours, but with dense kinetic barrages and focused plasma bursts aimed at specific nodal junctions along the Harvester's hulls. They were not trying to overpower. They were probing, testing, adapting. The Harvester shifted formation, vast tendrils extending toward the smallest Terran ship. 3 constructs converged, surrounding it with overwhelming mass. Projected survival probability? 0. The ship rotated, exposing its reinforced dorsal plating, and vented something into space, a dense cloud of metallic chaff laced with electromagnetic interference. Harvester targeting signatures fluctuated for a fractional moment. In that fraction, the Terran vessel drove forward, not away, into the gap. Collision alarms echoed across Alliance channels. The Terran captain's voice cut through open comms, calm, almost conversational. Brace. The ship impacted the nearest Harvester's outer plating at relativistic acceleration. The shock wave rippled through both hulls. Where we expected annihilation, we witnessed penetration. The Terran vessel's reinforced prow embedded itself into the biomechanical armor like a blade. Boarding clamps deployed. The observation chamber erupted in overlapping signals of disbelief. "They are attempting internal breach?" someone demanded. Before analysis could complete, interior feeds from the Terran ship activated, shared voluntarily across Alliance channels. Lieutenant Armin Reyes stood within the boarding bay, encased in reinforced combat exoskeleton. Around him, humans secured helmets and checked weapon systems while hull tremors shook the deck. "Remember your sectors. We're not here to be heroes. We're here to make them bleed." Bleed. The docking clamps detonated inward charges. The Harvester's armor ruptured, and the humans entered. The footage that followed remains restricted in many systems, but I saw enough. The interior of the Harvester was not mechanical in any recognizable sense. It was a cathedral of living alloy, ribbed corridors pulsing with energy. Organic cables writhed along walls. Defensive organisms detached from surfaces lunging toward the breach. The first Terran through the opening was struck by a tendril that pierced clean through shoulder plating. He did not fall. He severed the appendage with a close-range plasma burst and advanced, dragging the embedded fragment free from his own armor. Zero gravity turned the corridor into a chaotic ballet of recoil and debris. Humans pushed off walls, anchoring themselves with magnetic boots only long enough to fire controlled bursts into glowing nodal clusters. A defensive pulse detonated nearby. One human's arm bent backward at an impossible angle. He caught it with his opposite hand, forced it back into alignment with a sickening snap, and continued firing. I felt something inside me recoil. This was not rage, it was not frenzy, it was deliberate. Outside, the battle intensified. 2 Terran ships were lost, fully consumed by molecular dissolution before escape vectors could be calculated. Their final transmissions were brief. Hold the line. No screams, only instruction. Medbay feeds from surviving vessels displayed scenes I struggle to recount.
Humans with catastrophic trauma, burns across exposed tissue, fractures visible beneath torn fabric, were stabilized in minutes. Synthetic coagulants sealed wounds, portable regeneration matrices accelerated clotting. "Return me to deployment," one soldier insisted, blood still visible along his jawline. "You've lost too much volume," a medic argued. "Others haven't." The soldier stood and left. On the Harvester, Reyes' squad advanced toward what analysts identified as a central processing nexus, a massive pulsating core embedded within layered armor. Defensive organisms swarmed. A plasma discharge tore through Reyes' flank, spinning him to a bulkhead. His suit integrity warning flashed critical. He pushed off the wall, advanced. "Charge set," a human reported. 30 seconds, Reyes replied. The Harvesters reacted. For the first time in recorded engagement, their formation shifted defensively rather than offensively. External tendrils withdrew, energy output redirected inward. They were protecting something. Outside, remaining Terran ships exploited the hesitation, concentrating fire along newly exposed joints. Armor ruptured, luminescent veins dimmed. Inside, the detonation triggered. The Harvester's core convulsed, light flaring violently before collapsing into darkness. Across the observation chamber, data feeds spiked. One construct, disabled. The impossible had occurred. The Harvesters recalculated. We knew because their advance slowed. Their targeting patterns shifted. They began to retreat. At first, it was subtle, a fractional change in vector, then unmistakable. Massive constructs turning away from the Terran fleet. For the first time in recorded engagement, a strategist whispered, voice trembling, "They are withdrawing." The void, once silent and merciless, filled with Terran comms traffic, static, laughter, exhausted, disbelieving laughter. Reyes' voice emerged over open channel, ragged but steady. "We can bleed," he said. Cheers erupted across Terran frequencies. Not triumph, relief. 2 more Harvesters sustained critical damage as Terran ships pursued briefly before falling back to regroup. They did not chase recklessly. They did not overextend. They consolidated, adapted again. When the final Harvester slipped into dark space, the battlefield was a graveyard of debris, Terran wreckage intermingled with fragments of living alloy. Casualty reports began to compile. Losses were severe, but extinction had not occurred. The council chamber remained frozen in stunned silence long after combat feeds dimmed. I replayed a single moment in my mind, a human soldier resetting his own dislocated limb mid-battle, advancing not because victory was guaranteed, but because retreat would doom others. Predators had met resistance, not equal in mass, not equal in scale, but equal in refusal. Lieutenant Reyes' battered face appeared on final transmission before his feed cut. "We bought you time," he said simply. Time. In galactic conflict, time is survival. As emergency rescue vessels moved to extract surviving Terran crews, I felt a realization settle over me with terrible clarity. The Harvesters had encountered countless civilizations. Most retreated, most calculated losses and accepted annihilation. But this time, they met a species that does not accept extinction. And for the first time since the rim systems fell, a new thought surfaced within the council chamber, fragile but undeniable. The void had learned something today: fear. But as debris drifted across the silent battlefield and casualty numbers climbed, another question formed, one far more unsettling than any before it. If this was humanity restrained, what would happen when they decided not to be?
Victory did not arrive with celebration. It arrived as a list of names. Across every Alliance network, Terran casualty reports scrolled in stark white text against black void. Identification numbers, service records, confirmed lost, missing in vacuum, presumed unrecoverable. The Harvesters had retreated, but they had taken thousands with them. I watched the feed alone in my quarters long after the council adjourned. My species does not display grief publicly. We process loss in silence through archival rites and memory preservation. Humans do not. Terran channels broadcast memorials in real time, faces, voices, laughter captured from training recordings, families speaking into cameras with trembling defiance. "They held the line," one human said, tears visible yet unhidden. "They bought others' time." Bought, as though survival were a commodity paid in flesh. Regenerative biology does not equal invulnerability. I had studied the scans: cellular repair cascades, shock tolerance, adaptive neurology. None of it prevented death, it only delayed it. I requested authorization to visit the primary Terran medical vessel stationed at the Rim Recovery Zone. Permission was granted, perhaps because I had been present at the beginning, the demonstration, the breath. The ship was not elegant. Its hull bore fresh scars, patchwork plating layered over molecular scarring from harvester weaponry. Interior corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and ionized metal. Medics moved quickly but without panic, efficiency shaped by necessity. In triage bays, humans lay suspended in regeneration matrices, some unconscious, some awake and speaking softly with medical staff. Limbs encased in stabilization frames, synthetic grafts sealing burns that would have sterilized most species instantly. I paused at one bay where a human soldier, face bandaged, chest wrapped in polymer mesh, was staring at a projection of stars. "You should be resting," a medic told him gently. "I am," he replied. His voice was steady, as though catastrophic trauma were merely inconvenience. I was escorted deeper into the vessel. Lieutenant Armin Reyes was housed in a restricted ward. The sight of him unsettled me more than the battlefield had. He lay partially upright within a grav-stabilized cradle. Medical displays surrounded him, projecting internal scans in translucent layers. Hemorrhaging along abdominal cavity, contained but severe. Spinal fractures supported by adaptive braces. Neural inflammation markers still elevated. He had survived, barely. His skin was pale beneath residual bruising, one arm immobilized entirely, microsutures traced along his jawline. He noticed me before I spoke. "You made it off-world," he said, voice rough but conscious. "I did. You nearly did not." A faint exhale, almost a laugh, escaped him. It triggered a spike of pain across his monitors. "Yeah," he admitted, "we cut that one close." I reviewed his medical data with clinical detachment. My species prefers analysis to emotion. Internal bleeding had required emergency field intervention during extraction, at least 3 vertebrae compromised, temporary neural disruption along lower motor pathways. "You will require extended recovery," I observed. "Already asked how soon I can stand," he replied. The medic nearby cast him a warning glance. I hesitated before asking the question that pressed against my consciousness. "Why apologize?" He blinked slowly. "In the docking bay, before sedation, you said you were sorry for not finishing the job faster." Reyes's gaze drifted toward the ceiling, where faint reflections of starlight shimmered through reinforced plating. "We lost 2 ships before we crippled the first core," he said quietly. "If we'd figured out their architecture sooner, maybe one of those crews makes it home." The statement struck with greater force than any harvester weapon. "You attribute their deaths to your timing?" I asked. "I was in command," he replied simply. "No defensiveness, no attempt to redirect responsibility, only ownership. My species assigns causality to systems, to probability, to environmental variables. Humans assign it to themselves." Outside the ward, I heard something unfamiliar, rhythmic sound echoing down the corridor. I followed it briefly. Humans gathered in a common chamber. Some wore medical braces, some leaned heavily on companions. At the center stood a small projection, images of those lost in battle. They spoke the names aloud, one by one, voices breaking, shoulders shaking. Some wept openly, pressing hands to faces. Others stared forward, eyes wet but unashamed. This was not weakness, it was acknowledgement. They did not archive their dead into quiet data vaults. They felt them, fully. I returned to Reyes.
Does it not diminish morale to experience grief so intensely? He looked at me with something approaching confusion. No, he said. It reminds us what we're fighting for. He shifted slightly, wincing as spinal stabilizers compensated. We think resilience means we don't hurt, that we just override it. I remained silent. That's not it, he said. We hurt a lot. The admission carried no shame. We just don't let it be the last thing we do. The words settled into me like gravitational mass. Strength, I realized, was not the absence of suffering. It was choosing to continue despite it. Medical staff adjusted his support cradle, preparing to induce rest cycle sedation. Another fleet will come, I said quietly. The harvesters will adapt. Good. So will we. There was no bravado, only inevitability. As I departed the vessel, I passed rows of recovery bays, humans scarred, burned, broken in ways that would end most species permanently. And yet they spoke of rebuilding, refitting ships, returning to the rim. The galaxy had witnessed their resilience in battle. Now we witnessed something far more destabilizing, their vulnerability. They were not invincible titans. They were fragile organisms who chose repeatedly to stand back up. And somehow, that was more powerful. Back in the council chamber, updated projections illuminated the star map. The harvesters had altered course, but not retreated fully from the rim. They were regrouping, learning, as were we. Alliance species debated fortification strategies, defensive grids, fallback lines. For the first time, Terran representatives were not peripheral voices in these discussions. They were central, not because they were unbreakable, but because they understood the cost of breaking and returned anyway. I replayed the moment in the containment chamber, the flatline, the breath. Then I replaced that image with another. Humans speaking the names of their dead, tears unhidden, voices unwavering. If resilience was their biology, then grief was their fuel. And as long-range sensors detected faint distortions at the edge of known space, signatures not yet confirmed but disturbingly familiar, I felt a realization crystallize within me. The harvesters had encountered resistance. Next time, they would encounter something more, because humanity had learned the shape of its enemy, and pain, to them, was never the end of the story.
The Academy no longer teaches inevitability. Years have passed since the harvesters first darkened our stars. The rim still bears scars, systems rebuilding, orbital rings reforged from debris fields that once marked annihilation. The war did not end in a single decisive battle. It became something slower, strategic, relentless, like the humans themselves. I now stand where my professors once stood, at the center of the grand medical auditorium. The vaulted ceiling remains unchanged, sigils of 87 species glowing softly overhead. But the curriculum has shifted. What was once spectacle is now doctrine. The containment field hums to life before a new generation of students. Their frills and crests flicker in anticipation. They have grown up in a galaxy that survived because extinction was challenged. They know the story, but they have not felt it. Today, I begin, my voice resonating through the chamber, we examine the Terran principle of defiance. A projection blooms into existence above the containment field. Lieutenant Armin Reyes. The original recording. Gravity surge parameters scroll along the lower edge of the display. Atmospheric depletion curves, thermal spike thresholds. The students shift uneasily as the sequence begins. Phase 1. The gravity multiplier increases. The human's posture buckles slightly. Phase 2. Oxygen levels drop. Capillaries rupture across his eyes. Phase 3. Thermal distortion ripples across the field. I watch my students instead of the recording. Some lean forward. Some recoil instinctively as fractures form along his arm. Then, the fall, the flatline, the silence. Even after all these cycles, that moment still compresses the air within my thoracic cavity. One of the younger students whispers what countless before them have whispered. That should have killed him. I allow the silence to linger before responding. Yes, I say softly, but it did not. The recording continues. The breath, ragged, violent, defiant. Neural activity reignites. Cardiac impulse stabilizes. Microfractures knit. He stands. I pause the projection there. Reyes upright within the containment field, blood visible, pain unmistakable, yet conscious. This, I tell them, was the moment the Alliance redefined survival. A hand rises from the third tier. Professor, the student asks, was it purely biological? Accelerated cellular repair? Shock resistance? The question is familiar. No, I reply. Biology enabled it. It did not cause it. I gesture, and the display shifts from the demonstration to archival battle footage. The first engagement at the rim. Terran vessels against the harvesters. Boarding actions. Controlled chaos in zero gravity. Human physiology grants resilience, but resilience without will is merely durability. The projection shifts again to memorial gatherings aboard Terran vessels. Humans speaking the names of their dead aloud. Observe. They feel loss intensely. They do not suppress it. They do not archive it quietly. A murmur spreads through the chamber. Does that not weaken them? Another student asks. It strengthens them, I answer, because pain becomes purpose. In the years following the first rim engagement, the Alliance changed. My own species, once reliant on early retreat protocols, rewrote our military doctrine. We extended endurance training beyond conservative thresholds. Our medical sciences incorporated human regenerative catalysts adapted safely for our physiology. Other civilizations followed. The Illyrians reinforced their hull designs using Terran redundancy principles, layered plating rather than singular optimal shielding. The Carthaginian integrated human-inspired decentralized command structures, allowing decentralized adaptation when central nodes failed. Even our philosophical archives evolved. Where extinction had once been treated as statistical inevitability under certain conditions, it is now framed as a variable to contest. Humanity did not teach us how to conquer. They taught us how to endure. The containment field powers down, and the auditorium lights rise gradually. I step closer to the students. You will face threats, some beyond prediction, some beyond scale. The harvesters were not the last. A ripple of unease moves through the tiers. But you will remember this, I continue, gesturing toward the frozen image of Reyes standing within the field. Limits are often projections. A final student raises a trembling limb. Professor, they ask, are humans unbreakable? The question carries the same misunderstanding I once held. No, I say firmly, they break. I let the words settle. They break often. Images flash briefly on the display. Reyes in the medical cradle, Terran soldiers in recovery bays, scars, braces, tears. They endure, I correct, and then they stand again. The session concludes, but several students remain seated, staring at the projection as though it might move again. As they file out, I linger alone in the chamber. The sigils above seem less like relics now, more like witnesses to transformation. I access a private archive, an updated image of Lieutenant Reyes, older, hair streaked with gray, scars faint but present. He survived the war's opening chapters and went on to command entire defense networks. We speak occasionally. He once told me something I did not fully understand at the time. Endurance isn't about winning. It's about making sure there's still something left to fight for. Outside the Academy's crystalline dome, stars shimmer across the void. Trade routes pulse with renewed activity. Colonies expand cautiously back into reclaimed systems. The galaxy still contains dangers, but it also contains something it once lacked: confidence. There was a time when extinction felt inevitable,
when superior force meant inevitable surrender, when loss ratios dictated retreat without contest. That time ended in a classroom demonstration, in a flat line, in a breath that defied projection. I deactivate the containment field and dim the lights. If future generations ever forget what survival can look like, the recording will remain, not as spectacle, not as anomaly, but as a reminder. In a universe that calculates outcomes in cold probability, endurance became hope, and hope, once awakened, is remarkably difficult to extinguish.